Christchurch manifesto. You are feeding something that is vitriolic and hateful, and you're causing more division. You're causing, there's not a causation, but there is definitely a correlation here. Your election has led to more people being radicalized and a small portion of them going out and committing acts of violence. And there was no willingness to hear that. And there was no willingness to really take on domestic terrorism because it was coming from the right. And he recognized that white supremacists were kind of a part of his base. So that it changed things for me. I had a conversation with a friend who said, hey, who are you going to vote for? And I just instinctively was like, not him. And it also was that moment where you're like, oh, I'm serving in a capacity where I am supposed to be supportive. I think loyalty test is too far, but you are supposed to, if you're a political appointee, you probably should have voted and planned to vote for him. And I couldn't say that anymore. So it put some urgency there. It took a while to actually step away, but I wasn't planning on speaking out. Miles kind of dragged me a bit, but more so it was what happened at Lafayette Square and what happened in Portland. To me, those are moments where the abuse of power became so grave that I felt like it was important to speak out and make sure that the American public have the facts so they can make the decision. Because I think there have been a lot of adults in the room over the last 4 years that have covered good for our republic for the last 4 years, but they've covered for him. And because they've covered for him, I don't think the American people have a good picture of his lack of competence. I think they know his lack of character, but the lack of competence is so dangerous. And I'm very concerned for our country if he were to win another 4 years.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So, Miles, you persuaded Elizabeth, but what was your breaking point?
And I don't know, and before that, I don't know if Olivia would say that I persuaded her, but we did have a really intensive conversation where Olivia looked at me and she was like, I think you're doing something very stupid that's probably going to get you killed. No, she didn't quite say that, but I think we reversed roles there and we ended up in a good place. But I'm really, just to kick off, I'm really glad to be here with two people I consider very close friends and two people I consider very courageous. I ended up writing this op-ed really nuking the president's record on national security the night that my car got rear-ended and I was in a terrible mood and I went home and I just banged this op-ed out. But really, both Elizabeth and Olivia had much more considered and deliberate approaches to coming out to oppose the president. So I've got to hat tip them for their courage and their strength and their eloquence out there. I really could not be prouder to be associated with these two colleagues. They are wonderful people, great public servants, and frankly, neither of them is a politico, so to speak, or sort of a political hack. They're both really dedicated national security professionals who were brought to this moment by the courage of their convictions. So hat tip to them for that. And thanks to the guy who rear-ended me on Massachusetts Avenue for convincing me that I should go do the same. Mindy, it's a good question. For me, it like a lot of folks, it was a slow accrual of really bad events and experiences. And when I first came into the administration to be John Kelly's sort of national security advisor, counselor for intelligence issues and counterterrorism, I didn't have a lot of exposure to the president at the beginning. Now, interestingly, before the president took office, I had exposure to him because I was helping the transition team and a number of people who were trying to get cabinet positions in the administration. So I was going to Trump Tower and engaging. And upon first contact with then candidate Trump in 2016, I recognized, like other people, that this was a man of imperfect character, okay? And that's an understatement. I was helping prep Trump for the debates with Hillary Clinton, especially the second debate. And I was working with my old boss on Capitol Hill at the time, someone Evan knows well, Michael McCall, who then was chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. We were trying to get Trump to publicly acknowledge that Russian interference in the election, which we're years from that now, people forget, we were in the middle of the election in 2016. And it was clear that the Russians were interfering to sow discord, and it had already become clear that they were interfering to try to boost Donald Trump. And so we tried to convince him to speak out and say in one of the debates, this is unacceptable. It doesn't matter who the Russians are trying to support. Moscow interfering in US affairs is something that's going to be condemned and it's going to be punished, whether it's me or it's Hillary in the Oval Office. And we felt foolishly confident going into that discussion that candidate Donald Trump would say, that's right. You know, we're going to tell them we're going to kick their butts. Instead, then candidate Trump's response in debate prep was, I don't believe it. It's all BS. And Michael Flynn, who was in the room, said, yeah, it's all intelligence community BS. It's all made up. McCall and I were stunned. We were stunned that they were in such denial of information that had been collected that, you know, by people who'd risked their lives to get it. Evan knows this. He served our country in some of the darkest and most dangerous corners of the world. These are people who'd served in the intelligence community, risked their lives to get this information, and the candidates discarding that. So look, I knew from day one who Donald Trump was, Mindy, and as time went on, my concern about his character only grew. But like Elizabeth, like Olivia, I served in this administration because if any of us didn't, it was lackeys and political hacks from Trump Tower who were going to fill positions of immense national security importance. So I have no regrets about that, no regrets whatsoever. I would do it again in a heartbeat. But as time went on, the thing we were wrong about was our ability to steer Donald Trump onto the right path. Donald Trump, if left to his own devices, will always choose the wrong path. But worse than that, even if there's people who try to put him back on that wrong path, he will identify them and systematically purge them from his orbit. This is a lifelong trait. It's not me being hyperbolic. Go read any article about Trump through history and his business operations. And so if there was a straw that broke the camel's back moment, it was we were down at the border in April of 2019, and the president said, I want to block everyone from coming into the United States. I want to seal the country, is basically what he told us. And he said, and especially here at the southern border, no one gets in. We said, Mr. President, that's actually not legal, because under US law, if someone shows up and they're fleeing violence and persecution, they have a right to claim asylum and have the courts hear their case. So we said, that would be illegal, sir. We can't do that. And he said, I don't care if you go to jail, I'll pardon you. And that was truly, it was a seminal moment to me, because it was the moment that I recognized that all of the saying no to Donald Trump didn't matter anymore, right? He was willing to exchange presidential pardons for illegal behavior. And I really couldn't be associated with that anymore. We'd stopped a lot of bad stuff from happening. And I know some people don't believe that, and that's fine. They say, how could the administration have been worse than it is? Trust me, believe me, dear God, if Donald Trump had walked in with his Trump Tower team on day one and not had John Kelly and Jim Mattis and Rex Tillerson and HR McMaster, year 1 and 2 would have been an unmitigated nightmare. And years 3 and 4 have shown that to be the case, because I really sincerely think they've been worse. And years 5, 6, 7, and 8, if he gets a second term, will be dramatically worse, because the president has been constrained by one thing and one thing only the past 4 years, and that is the fear that he'll be seen as a loser and that he won't be reelected to a second term. That fear will be gone if the president's reelected, and all of the bad things that he wanted to do, that people, great patriots like John Kelly, prevented from happening, the president will pursue with alacrity. And that's why it's really important for those who are listening tonight to be engaged, to get involved. And let me make one pitch before we jump into other questions. And that's this: we've done a lot of polls and surveys and analyses on what's effective right now in swing states with people and convincing them to do what's right in this election. And this isn't a boast for Olivia or Elizabeth, but the videos and the testimonials that they've recorded about their time in the Trump administration have scored higher in convincing swing state voters, higher than anything else produced in this election cycle, more than the slick advertisements with the voiceover, Donald Trump is the worst man, right? It's people like Olivia and Elizabeth who are telling their stories that are actually convincing swing state voters to go the right direction. Share those things. Push that to your friends. Push that to your conservative friends. And the last data point I'll give you is this. Today, a Rasmussen poll showed that if it weren't for the 4% of Republicans who right now are opposing Donald Trump, this race would be a dead heat. it would be even in the swing states. The only reason right now Joe Biden is winning in the swing states is that 4% of Republicans, these never Trump Republicans, as the polls are calling them, are breaking towards Joe Biden. So share Olivia's testimonial, share Elizabeth's testimonial. It is having an impact. So Mindy, forgive me for that really long-winded answer, but thank you for the question.
Oh, thank you, Miles. That was great. So, Olivia, we just listened to Miles, talk about his decision to serve in the Trump administration, and there are sort of differing views about whether people should serve, good people should serve or not. After the election, some friends of mine came to me and said, "Look, I'm definitely not a supporter of this president, but I have this opportunity, and maybe I can do some good inside the administration." And my view was, hey, if you're a good person and you can maintain your values and your principles and serve in this administration, you should do it because the American people need you. But at the same time, others in the administration have certainly facilitated Trump's excesses and incompetence and corruption. And so, you and Miles and Elizabeth have made a decision to come out and be the strong voices and lead the way you are. What do you think, balancing all those things, what is the responsibility? How should people inside the administration who maybe haven't made the decision that you've made, and of course it's very late in the game, but there's still time on the clock, what is their responsibility at this moment? Should they be doing the things that you're doing? What's preventing them from doing that? How should we understand them in their situations?
Well, I come at this from various angles, right? So I started my career as a Eisenhower intern. I started at the Republican National Committee. I was a Bush appointee. And then I really, truly dedicated myself to national security in a very non-political way, right? I was a career intelligence officer, which you check your politics at the door. And then I went to DHS. And I guess what I would say to them is, it was a very personal and very hard decision for me to come forward and speak out. And I give you the context of my background because traditionally, I mean, this, Evan, you don't, in our careers, like you don't talk to the press. You don't talk about what's happening. You don't talk about how the process is being done. These are just things that you hold close to your chest and you serve unwaveringly, regardless of who is in office. And that is why I signed up to work in the vice president's office. Well, first of all, I blame Miles. So there you go. I'll say the cat's out of the bag. It is his fault that I ended up there, but that's okay because I worked with Miles and Elizabeth both at DHS. But and I can vouch for them, and I can say that everything that they have said, I probably worked with, coordinated, or lived with them. And then later on down the road, I end up living it inside the White House, watching it from that angle while they're working on these policies back at DHS. And I guess I would say to my colleagues is, we all, for many reasons, people join administrations. And sometimes, it's the political attractiveness of it. If you are, part of the Trump campaign and things like that. For other reasons, such as you mentioned, Evan, some of us were called to serve because we felt if not me, then who? And then you started to look around at who was sort of coming in along the way. And you thought it's better to have good, committed, qualified people trying to do their best in these roles. But I will say this, there's a difference between trying to make a difference internally along the way when you feel you actually are steering the course of events and impacting. And where we're at right now is this is the moment to steer the course for these people who signed up to make a difference. Because talking about it now and coming forward right at the moment of the election is when it's actually going to make a difference. And we all know the truth about what has been going on behind the scenes. We've all had the conversations behind closed doors. Certainly, we've all kind of shared frustrations along the way and just sort of watching how things have developed. And the president is he is who he is, right? He's not going to change. And as hard as it is to come forward, what matters more is our country. It matters more than the political sort of, I will call it the palace intrigue of, your career will be there. You'll be able to make a difference in whatever, in another way. It's always going to be there if you have a calling for that. But I strongly believe that now is really the moment that matters, which is why you have people like Elizabeth and Miles who came forward. And I have to say, if I didn't have them and organizations like yours and RBAT and others standing there, where I was watching a lot of the ads and a lot of the speaking out internally from my office in the White House, if I didn't have those people to look to and know that there was a whole group of Republicans out there who had similar values to mine, that were going to be the safety net if I decided to come forward, I don't know that I would have done it. But we're all living proof that we're here, right? And there is going to be a future. There's going to be a better day, and I strongly believe that. But it's going to take all of us together. And I think that if you wait and you give this man, this incompetent, dangerous person in the Oval Office 4 more years, you're going to remember this moment. I really do believe that. And you'll look back on it later on. And I think that you're going to have really just a very hard time reconciling it. We're knowing that at the moment, at the greatest moment that mattered, you didn't step forward. And I think that is what it means to serve in the White House or in the administration. It is, after all, the people's house, right? People entrust and they vote. And you do hold a power to a certain extent. And that power right now matters.
Thank you.
Evan,
so
just really quick, just one thing really quickly I want to say about what Olivia just noted, and that is we're all making these points as 3 people who are Republicans who really wanted Donald Trump to succeed. And again, none of us are Democratic operatives. None of us wanted this presidency to fail. All 3 of us witnessed this thing go from potentially, beneficial presidency to the country and to the conservative movement to the absolute train wreck that it is. And also, none of the 3 of us are disgruntled employees. None of us were fired from our jobs. All 3 of us, I think, to a person, was asked to serve further in the administration, and in some cases more senior positions in the administration, and we all left on our own accord. So I just want to say that at the outset, because I understand that there would be skeptics about what Olivia said and what Elizabeth said and what I said, but we're not evil Dem operative deep staters. We saw this guy up close, and it was the nightmare that Olivia said it was.
And Taylor, I would also say, or Miles, I would also say that even those of us who are, quote, never Trumpers, those who have opposed Trump in the 2016 campaign and then opposed him all the way through and didn't make the same decisions you made, which I understand. And I think there's good reason for making them. Again, I think good people needed to serve. But I'll say that even somebody like me, hoped that President Trump would be successful, would serve all Americans well, would lead the country forward, unite the country. I would have loved to have been wrong about all of the things I said in 2016 about Trump. I really would have, sincerely. And, unfortunately, that's not how things played out. But no patriotic American, hopes for an American president to fail. And, I too wish we'd been wrong about him. So thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, I became pretty uncomfortable even with the term never Trump post-election, and even events that we would have standing up for democratic values. The press always liked to write it as a never Trump fest because that's sensational, that's what people like. And Evan and I would have these conversations because it was something that made us uncomfortable. Once he was president, it is the United States of America. We're allowed to speak up and criticize the president or try to hold him accountable to better decisions and better values. And that's what we were doing. But we just didn't like the idea of being kind of against the president. We wanted to root for the president to be successful. In fact, that's why we criticize him. That's why you in your roles would try to give him better advice so he could make better decisions. So I think for a lot of our viewers, many of them are convinced about Trump's wrongness. But can you give us a sense of, maybe this is a jump in. Elizabeth, maybe start with you. One is, what will it take to repair the damage that President Trump has done, in particular to the executive branch, or you can kind of localize it to DHS? And on that line of thinking, what could Joe Biden do, and what should he do if he were to be elected president, to start some of that repair process?
It's hard to articulate how much brain drain type of damage has been done across the government, but particularly in the intelligence community, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security, which Trump loved to target his ire at. And it has burned a lot of people out. A lot of people were pushed aside or asked to do things that they couldn't in their conscience, and resigned instead. So it just if you're not familiar with government hiring systems, it takes a year to hire somebody in the government. It's completely broken. It shouldn't be that way, but that's usually start to finish. It can take up to a year. So just if you wanted to on January 21st, offer everybody that had to resign, that was a civil servant, their jobs back, they still couldn't start working for probably 6 to 8, maybe 12 months, depending on how expedited they can make it. So there's going to be a period of time where the agencies have a lot of vacancies, and that creates extra workload. So you already have a low morale for those that are still there. You have a lot of vacancies, and it's going to take time to fill those vacancies. So those are just institutional things that are going to take years to recover from. At DHS in particular, we have there were a number of civil servants that, Miles, I'll let you chime in on some of this, because they were put in impossible positions, right? In order to do their job, they had to go along with some things that some people think cross the line. And I think there is going to be a desire on other civil servants, a desire for vengeance, if you will, for purging out anybody that went along, and how you make those decisions such that people feel like there can be trust in the chain again, in their chain of command, and that I'm not aware of anybody burrowing in at DHS, but if there were burrowing in, and making sure that is dealt with. But there are plenty of career officials who went along with things, and it has caused others to resent them. And so working through that is going to be a challenge for any new political leadership that's come in. But I think things that Biden can do, make sure that his appointments to DOJ, DHS, and IC are inherently non-political, like ideally not somebody that served in the Congress, or not somebody that has held elected office, but somebody that is seen as a subject matter expert for a particular aspect that is relevant to one of those communities, and somebody that is seen as apolitical. I think that would help those organizations begin to repair the institutions as they've been damaged. And then certainly there's a lot of policy work at DHS that needs to be done to undo certain regulations, undo certain executive orders. And then the caution there that I would share with a potential Biden administration is that there are some elements of some of the more controversial programs in particular that I have no doubt they've already written the executive orders to rescind, things like the travel ban. I have no doubt that will be an important action that they take on day one to rescind. But there are some security enhancements that have been made that wouldn't be obvious to a casual observer, that it would be important to talk with the program people to understand what aspects of this do we want to keep, not banning countries from coming in, but the underlying program itself of evaluating which countries pose a risk in their travelers coming to the United States. There's some good tools there that we wouldn't want to see lost. So taking a balanced approach, not taking a vengeful approach, and taking as much as possible a political approach to those particular agencies, I think would be really helpful getting started on the repair that's needed.
That's a great description of a starting place and an approach, Elizabeth, and certainly a direction that many of us would like to go in. But if we could just, as a group here, think about what's at stake, what happens if we don't go in that direction. Olivia, we spent a lot of our time in 2016 warning the American people about what we thought a Trump administration would look like and what it would do. But you three have had the experience of working in it, and so I want to ask you that question. You play that role if you would, and tell us what would we or what should we expect? What is at stake? I hear a lot of people or some people on the right who have been skeptical of Trump saying, look, I still don't love Trump, but he's done this. He's moved the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He's appointed good judges. He's done all these, he's done these things that I like. He fights the culture war. So I'm going to cast a vote for Donald Trump. Again, sort of trading these partisan wins for perhaps the health of the republic, as I would say. But what are some of the specific kinds of things that what would you predict that we would see in the next administration that we should be concerned about?
Well, first I'll start with probably something that's near, on our radar every single day. And you can expect that we will lose a lot more people in this pandemic. I mean, if he wins, it will continue to stay the way it is. He will expect states to continue to have ownership. I've been there firsthand. We did not have the state's backs on this at all. We put on a facade at times that we did, but it was really the mentality of, we, as in the White House, as in the president, don't want to own this pandemic response because they knew that it was already going in the direction of failure. And if that is your mindset as a leader who's leading the federal government on this response, that is a serious problem because the governors at times were faced with some very, very hard decisions. And they asked us for help. They asked us for certain guidelines that they needed, or they asked us, hey, if you can't get the testing out, can you at least work with us to explain us the testing process? And at certain times we did, but these are real life, human life examples, right? This pandemic is so near and dear because you're watching what's happening now as we go into the winter. This all could have been prevented. I mean, not completely, but we certainly knew in the spring. I mean, we had the briefings where we talked about the fact that the fall and the winter, if we didn't get ahead of it in the summer, would be bad. And you were watching this play out exactly how the president was briefed. I cannot stress that enough, that he is well aware of what was about to happen. And that will happen if he remains in place. And I'm not saying that Joe Biden will be able to come in and flip a switch and gain control of the pandemic, because I'm telling you, we're in a bad place right now. He is going to be coming in to a situation that's going to be very hard to kind of steer and dig out of. But what I do know is that, he will do it with empathy, at least. And he will do it in a manner that is not completely disconnected from the reality of what people down at the local and state level and in the hospitals and in the first responders are facing. And so that is just one main example of it. Right now, there are numerous other examples. Our national security, the fact that our intelligence community has completely been undermined, discredited. I mean, I would say that to go as far as that it's been gutted. So the president has not only gutted the national security and intelligence community, watch that pattern and take a step back. He's done that in that space. He then shifts. He's faced with a crisis domestically on a national security pandemic response, right? We're not talking about foreign adversaries in elections. Check that box, he's done that. We're not talking about sometimes, favoring partners such as Russia or possibly other bad actors. Check that box, he's done that. But we're talking now where he shifts to the public health community. And because they won't go along with it, and they certainly won't lie because they have the science and data to back them, and they try to speak out repeatedly, he then shifts and discredits them and undermines them. It's a complete undermining of everything that America and our institutions that are there for a reason, right? They're there, they exist for a reason. The process exists for a reason. And he has completely done everything he can to destroy it because he doesn't want the checks and balances. He doesn't want the checks and balances that our country was founded on. And so I think when you look at going forward, you should assume that there will be no checks and balances, that it's going to be 3 times as bad, even worse, on all of these areas. And it's not just, COVID and health. It's going to be what happens when we face a major national security threat from overseas. I mean, we know we've got it domestic. We know we've got it, white supremacy is on the rise here. We've got plain hatred and divisiveness on the rise. So this is going to continue to escalate, and all of these things are going to come to a head, and he will be in the driver's seat. And that to me is frightening. And that is what will happen. You should expect it. So when you weigh that against, one major issue that you can't waver on, I think you need to take a step back and say, is that one thing that I can advocate for, and I can continue to, support organizations that are going to back that policy and support this or weigh in on it or write, the Congress or senators. But you have to understand that when you're looking at it from the greater holistic picture of the overall, what it means to be America and this country and all the different pieces that come together, I think you really need to take all of that in and really look at the sum of all the parts, if that makes sense.
Very well said. Thank you.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Your testimony on this and every time you speak out has been so powerful. And you're answering to, and I think this is intentional, a question that is showing up in the chat quite a bit, and that we've been kind of looking to address at Stand Up Republic, which is there, among some undecided voters, there's just one bridge they're having a hard time getting over, which is that they're pro-life. And so they, even if they can understand that Donald Trump poses a national security threat, or that he's a bad moral character, or he's self-serving, they kind of keep coming back to that. And obviously I think that's a strategy of the Republican Party. That's something that they continue to use to keep voters in their corner and kind of enable them to do anything else and get away with everything else that they want to get away. Voters will keep coming back. But thank you, because your testimony helped answer that. And I'd like to turn to Miles, and on that question specifically is, what do you, if you're comfortable saying, what do you say to those voters who, they understand some of what's happening, or a lot of what's happening, but they just keep coming back to this point of that they're pro-life and they believe that, say, Donald Trump is pro-life, and so maybe they'll vote for him after all?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say to that is, whoever's president of the United States has very little influence over that question. And with our most recent Supreme Court nominee, the Republican Party, and look, thanks to Donald Trump's presidency, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Donald Trump became president. We were able to elect conservative justices to the Supreme Court. It's something that I'm happy about. I'm glad we have a more conservative Supreme Court. Some who are viewing might not agree, some agree. But at this point, given the way the court's structured, no one who's president in this next cycle is going to really have any bearing whatsoever on the question of life and when it begins and how we should treat it at its earliest stages. No one is going to be able to do anything of much consequence outside of the Supreme Court. The issue is over. It's done. And I'd be willing to stake my reputation on the fact that the next 4 years aren't going to matter when it comes to the White House and the question of pro-life. So if the reason you're unable to vote for Joe Biden and you feel like you got to vote for Donald Trump is a pro-life justification, I'm going to tell you right now, having served 2.5 years in this administration, having seen that man up close and personal in the Oval Office, Air Force One, the White House Situation Room, you're deciding on the wrong grounds, because that issue is going to be put to bed by where the Supreme Court is. And look, again, I'll reiterate, in part, that's because we had a Republican president who nominated and got people confirmed that were conservative justices. So we're in a good place there if that's your voting issue. But now your voting issue has got to be the stability of this republic. And I can tell you, having seen that man up close, he is an actual threat. And I can't believe I'm saying this. He's an actual threat to the stability of our democratic institutions and our republic. I was in the room when Donald Trump told us we needed to go to Congress and tell them to get rid of the judges. That's what he meant. He meant, I'm so sick of my decisions being overturned by the courts. Go to Congress and get rid of the judges. Tell them we need a bill to reduce the number of judges around the country. He directed us. He didn't ask us. He directed us to draft a bill to get rid of judges. That was crazy. We didn't do it. It's the same Donald Trump who took a very expansive view of his powers in office, so expansive that he preferred the company of autocrats in places like Beijing and Pyongyang and Moscow. And he would tell these people when he met with them that he was jealous of their systems because they could do what he wants. So, tried at least to destroy the courts here in the United States, tried to expand his presidential prerogative beyond the strictures of the executive branch. And when it comes to the legislative branch, Donald Trump would willfully obstruct the oversight powers of the legislative branch. I was there for that. I was there when he told us to come up with a systematic plan once the Democrats took the House of Representatives to skirt congressional oversight powers so that they wouldn't be able to expose the corruption of the administration. He has undertaken an effort system-wide to undermine our democratic institutions. So when it comes to someone like a Joe Biden, look, you bet your butt that on day one, Miles Taylor conservative, Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek loving libertarian conservative, which some of you may hate, that's fine, that's the conservative I am, is going to be opposing a lot of Joe Biden's policies, probably the bulk of Joe Biden's policies. But what I know about that man, like Evan having served with him and his staff in Congress, is that he's a good man. He's genuinely a good man, but more importantly, who reveres and respects our democratic institutions and is willing to exist within the system. And the beauty of our system is if someone does something bad, well, working within the system, we can undo it and do something good. The problem with Donald Trump is he's not working within the system to do something bad or good. He's literally trying to destroy the system itself, which is what is doing irreparable harm. I know that sounds crazy. I would hear myself 3 years ago and say, that was an overstatement, Miles. You're really, really hyperventilating about the president. But trust me on this. I've seen the guy. And you don't have to just trust me. Trust these other people who've spoken out against Donald Trump. And you saw the other day that we did a CNN special of dissidents from the Trump administration. As part of that, John Kelly had said that this is the most flawed human being he has ever met in his entire life. He's talking about the president, okay? John Kelly was a 4-star Marine general, an apolitical man. He's not a Democratic operative. He served our country in uniform. He lost his son in battle. And he's saying that the president of the United States is the most flawed human being he's ever met. This is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States. I don't want the most flawed human being John Kelly has ever met to be responsible for the safety and security of our troops and the security of our country. And I've seen how detrimental it is to both. And I've seen, like Olivia and Elizabeth, how bad and how much worse it could get in a second term.
If I can add to Mindy's question, I really struggled with the pro-life question. I knew I couldn't vote for Trump, but I didn't know what to do with my vote. And my husband and I came to different conclusions, but we just in our church happened to be reading through the Bible in a year, and this summer I ended up in the prophets, and it just was jumping off the page for me how frequently God holds accountable his people for two primary sins. One, worshiping other gods, meaning not worshiping God as the one and only God. And then, which you might expect. But the other thing is how they cared for the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the refugee or the sojourner, the poor. And I was so convicted. I was so convicted that my approach to a pro-life ethic had been, I mean, I've always had a heart for refugees, but if I were accurate in, assessing where I spent time and energy from a political perspective, it was in the anti-abortion space. And that's important. And for everything Miles reasoned, I don't think a vote for Biden is going to harm what has already been a trend of a reduction in abortions in this country to the lowest level since before Roe v. Wade. So I don't think that helped me when I saw those statistics, when I saw where we are as a country and how various efforts to reduce abortions is having an impact. It helped me get there. But then the other thing that helped me get there was realizing that a whole life pro-life ethic, it should be conception to grave, and it should address all of these other factors of caring and providing human dignity to everyone. And I think you see in this president the exact opposite. The way that he has reduced the refugee ceiling. Initially, he claimed it was for security purposes. I oversaw that program. It's not for security purposes anymore. We fixed the vetting problems in the first 2 years, and they keep reducing the ceiling. The stories that Miles has told coming out of the Oval Office of how he talks about wanting immigrants from Sweden and Nordic countries, but not from Haiti or African countries. There is a disgust there for people that are from underdeveloped countries and people of color, and it at some point it convicted me that I was looking at it the wrong way. I was looking at a party platform and being pro-life as opposed to assessing Trump against what Scripture says is good, and he doesn't measure up at all. So for me, it was both a practical argument, the one that Miles laid out, and then it was also going back to Scripture and letting Scripture convict me about that broader pro-life ethic.
Thank you both for those very eloquent responses to that difficult issue. We only have a few minutes left, unfortunately. I wish we could continue for another hour because this is just so fascinating, and I see how engaged the audience, our participants are, and I know others will very much value this conversation later on when they view it. But I would like to ask a question. I know you're working as and I'm a part of that effort, and but I'd love to hear you and Olivia. I'll start with you, and maybe I could get thoughts from all of you before we wrap up here. Unfortunately, again, we just have a few minutes. But what's next for this effort to reform the Republican Party? You've called for principle-based. We've called for principle-based leadership within the party. A lot of people in the audience now and later for this are principled Republicans and conservatives. And people are wondering, what is the future for the Republican Party? Will it or should it crumble and die? Is there an opportunity to reform it and take it into a healthy direction? How should we think about it? What's possible? What do we need to do? I know that's a big topic, but Olivia, if you could share a few thoughts on that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I think for me personally, to be very, very honest, I'm looking for that. I'm looking forward to all of us kind of taking responsibility and and working on the future of the party. Because I can tell you one thing that I know for me personally is if it continues to be the Trump Republican Party, then I'm already really struggling to figure out where my home is, right? And I can tell you one thing, I will not be part of a party that basically, from what I've seen, supports racism, supports the separation of immigrant children. Being an immigrant myself, I will not want to be party to a party that, you know, claims to support Christian beliefs and pro-life platforms, but exhibits everything that's contrary to it, if that makes sense. And I personally find that very just hurtful and egregious, because I was raised with conservative values. I too am from Texas, like Elizabeth, and you know, I come from a very unique background, and I think that I am looking to figure out what will we do in the next few years. And I think I do think we can sort of take it back, so to speak, because I think that there are a lot more people out there like me and Elizabeth and Miles and others who are trying to figure out what this means for the future.
Thank you, Olivia. Miles, Elizabeth, any parting words on that issue?
Yeah, one thing I'd add, and I actually think Elizabeth's the most fitting person to close the answer to that question out, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So hang on for that. The organization that we co-founded, that is, you know, hosting this event tonight, and Evan, of course, of which you're a part, is called Repair, and it's a name that came to me sort of surreptitiously. I was watching, this is going to sound made up. It's not made up. I was watching the Old Faithful geyser erupt in Yellowstone National Park, about the most American moment you can have. If you've not been to Yellowstone National Park, you should go. And I was trying to find a place to escape COVID, and I wasn't able to do a trip abroad that I was supposed to do. And I was watching it erupt, and literally the words came into my head: Republican Political Alliance for Integrity and Reform. Because I was sitting there and I was wrestling with this issue of, what do we do in a post-Donald Trump era? Whether it's Donald Trump's gone in 4 months, or he's gone in 4 years and 4 months, what do we do? How do we fix the party? I'm not one of those people that's like, let's burn the entire thing down. Nah, it's going to give the Democrats power for a generation. I really think we've got to reform the party of free minds and free markets and free people. And so those words popped into my head: Republican Political Alliance for Integrity and Reform. And incidentally, it turned out that there was sort of an acronym in there, and the acronym was Repair. And that has been, I think, the operative word of our conversation tonight, but is the operative word for the post-Trump era. Not just how do we repair the GOP, how do we repair the country post-Trump? How do we repair us? I have frayed relationships in my family, and certainly my friend group, after speaking out against the president, because a lot of my friends still work in the administration. I've got really frayed friendships and connections in the world because of this man. How do we fix that? And it doesn't start in Washington. Washington's not broken. America's broken, and Americans are broken, and we're disconnected from each other. So our organization is going to try, in a modest way, to facilitate that conversation within the Republican Party, among elected conservatives, about how we get back to a party of principles rather than a party that's built around a cult of personality. And we also want to facilitate that dialogue between y'all that are listening and watching, and your family members and your friends and your communities. And that's not a talking point. That's not me being, facetious. That's really what we've got to do. We've got to start there. We've got to start with you guys. And, that's something that our organization is going to be focused on. Now, I said I was going to throw it to Elizabeth last. And the reason for that being, whether Elizabeth likes it or not, I'm going to note that she's right now the interim executive director of Repair, and is running the organization. And there couldn't be a better person to run the organization. But I want to give her the final word, because Elizabeth, more than anyone, understands the importance of building connections in a meaningful way, the importance of community, and as someone who has lived her whole life with conviction and example of the power of that personal connection, and not just how it can change lives, but how it can keep a country together. So Elizabeth, hope that wasn't too much buildup. Over to you.
And I know we're really short on time, so I'll be really quick. I think it's really important to partner with organizations like you all. I mean, there are many groups that were created during the election cycle to appeal to different types of voters to try to persuade people to defeat Donald Trump. And those of us that can find that common ground are going to need to quickly come together so that we can fight for what the future looks like. I don't know, quite frankly, I don't know how this story ends. And as Olivia laid it out, I'm not going to sign up for something that is Trumpism. Like if that's what the GOP becomes, is the party of Trumpism, I will not be a member of the Republican Party. I will look for an alternative. And I think that there's probably enough of us out there to create a third party, which I realize has had not great success in our country's history, but I think this might be one of those historical moments where we see a shift. So unifying those of us that do find common agreement on principles of conservatism, and figuring out a way to invite more people into that with us, so that we don't. I think one of my biggest concerns is that we repeat the mistakes of what got us to Trumpism. So if you just go back, say 10 years or 15 years and say, well, I just want to be that kind of party. Well, that party led to Trump. So we're going to have to do a little bit of soul searching to understand how we ended up where we were, so that we don't repeat it. But I think doing it in community with people like you guys is going to be so critical. And I'm looking forward to the fight on November 3rd, and then the fight after for the future of our country.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was very well said. To all of you, Miles and Olivia as well. Thank you so much for spending time with us tonight. And I think I can speak for Mindy and myself, of course, when I say that we're just proud to be associated with you. I mean, you're such patriots. Thank you for your service, which includes what you're doing now. To those of you at home, thanks for tuning in tonight, or whenever you happen to watch this. Please know that your voices matter. You may not have a national voice. You may sometimes think that you can't make a difference, but it's just not the case. As important as political ads are, it is more important, I think, that people in your sphere of influence hear from you, hear your thoughts on these issues. So please take courage, push hard for the remaining days of this election. What you do, what you say really, really matters and can make the difference in ensuring a new direction for the country, and hopefully a new direction for the Republican Party. Thank you very much, all. Stay safe, be well.